Whether you are engaging in a very simple, easy to understand meditation practice, or a more elaborate one such as Chenrezig and other somewhat complicated, more involved practices that involve multiple steps and sometimes complex visualizations. Whatever the practice is that you're engaging in, one thing is very important. And that is to have a fundamental sense of why you're doing it. If you're merely doing it to please your teacher, or build a greater sense of who you are, or to look good to others, then mostly, until we get past all of that, there will not be much benefit to the practice. And the biggest problem with that is that we're all pretty smart. We want to do things that are beneficial for ourselves and for others. And if what we're doing does not appear to bring benefit to ourselves and others, then we are likely to abandon the practice. In this tradition, that is considered close to the worst thing that can happen. Better, some say, to have never practiced at all. Because when we abandon it, we have a certain sense that we tried it and it didn't work. And so we're not so likely to go back to it. Fortunately, it should not be so difficult to have a very clear sense of why we're engaging in the practice. So let's make sure this morning and this afternoon that we get that clear sense. First of all, and I think the most obvious, if it's not obvious, we need to have a conversation. that what we do and think is what we become. So if I continually judge people and believe in my judgments and my opinions about others, and especially when I judge and think of them as not so good over and over and over again, I am the one who becomes poisoned. And the bigger problem with that is not that I become poisoned, but that I actually believe it. And from the deep perspective of this tradition, there is fundamentally nothing wrong with any of us. We are all already endowed with this awakened mind. So our issue is not that we do not have the ability and the seed to attain enlightenment. The issue is that we believe we don't have it. That's the real problem. So how do we come to have confidence? The answer to that question is also really simple. What we think about continually, and what we say to ourselves in our more or less continuous ongoing conversations with ourselves, these things become what our mind does. So if we beat ourselves up, at a certain point it becomes automatic. On the other hand, if we take the aspiration for bodhicitta, the idea, the intention that our practice of meditation is to benefit all sentient beings, including ourselves and all others, and we do that continuously, there's a point in which that becomes automatic. So when we ask why we're engaging in the practice, the answer really should be clear, simple, easy to have confidence in. All of the practice of the Buddha Dharma is about mind training. So there is a mind training tradition, but we can say that even beyond that tradition, it's all about mind training. We want to train ourselves in a certain direction, and the practice, for example, today of shamatha or calm abiding, and now Chenrezig, we can see that we are going to train ourselves to think in a certain way. So this is not about brainwashing, not about forcing ourselves against our will, but first, in order for it to look good, we have to see something positive about it. So does it make sense? Does it look appealing even to engage ourselves in activities of the body and of the mind and of our speech that looks like it would benefit ourselves and others? If it doesn't look good, then my advice is don't do it. Look until it looks good, or else look somewhere else. It needs to look good, or we will once again abandon it at some point. So when we begin, if it's not already clear that thinking for intending to benefit all sentient beings looks like something worthwhile to do with my life, if it doesn't look like it's worthwhile, then you need to look in a different way to find something that is worthwhile. We can all practice anything for a while, whether it looks good or not. We can kind of give it a chance. But if it doesn't turn, then something different needs to happen. So I just want to say that to acknowledge that we come to the practice as ordinary sentient beings. We bring our confusion, we bring our suffering, we bring our opinions, we bring our anger, we bring our desire, we bring all the elements that constitute us. And those things sometimes stand in the way of doing something that might be really good. And sometimes we have to honor that it isn't working for us. So I want to put that on the table. As we begin the practice of Chenrezig, the first thing we're going to do is the practice of refuge. Refuge in bodhicitta again, which is more or less continuous throughout all of our practices. If we can give rise to the wish to benefit ourselves, then we can also give rise to the wish to benefit others. And if we can give rise to the wish to benefit others, we are naturally included in that. And so we can see a reason to engage in those practices. Step down and does anyone not have a text? I don't see any hands, so I'll assume you all have it. If you don't, we get you one. On page 11. On page 11, we go for refuge again. Pretty much, if you look at the English, it's very close to what we had at the beginning. It starts with the English on page 11. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Here, the Buddha can mean the historical figure and the teachings that the Buddha delivered and that are still preserved. It can also mean your own inherently pure, awakened mind that we are all endowed with. It can mean both of those things or either of those things. So until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, which is the body of teachings that we work with, and the excellent assembly references what we call the exalted Sangha. So the Sangha is the community of practitioners. The exalted Sangha is the community of realized practitioners, those who have not attained enlightenment necessarily, but have worked long enough such that they're clear about what it is that they're doing, why they're doing it, and how to engage in the practices fruitfully. So both of those sanghas are important. We have ourselves sitting here, we might say, a community of confusion. Fortunately, we've never witnessed anything like that before. This community of confusion recognizes its confusion. That's key point. We recognize the confusion. We recognize also our intention to engage in positive activities that will benefit both ourselves and others. That's the basis of a sangha, of a community of practitioners. And then there's the exalted sangha, which includes people whose names we understand, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many others like that, who we may never have met and not know their names, but they're there. And they provide a basis of confidence for us. That person looks good. What they say looks like I could do that, or at least I would want to do that. And so, therefore, perhaps I'm confident enough to be willing to engage. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Then at the bottom it says, through the merit of generosity and other virtues. Merit here can be troublesome just because of the word. So let's just look at what we're really talking about here. Everything that we do, I think we could all say that we're at least somewhat confident that everything that we do and even think, and certainly that we say, bears some result. Something happens by virtue of our thinking, something happens by virtue of our doing things, and something happens with our body, and something happens by our speech. If I say to myself 100 times a day, the only thing I care about is helping all sentient beings, there'll be a period of time that goes by when I just recite that, but at a certain point it will imbue my speech even. My speech will change by virtue of just saying it to myself. My thinking will change by virtue of giving rise to the aspiration. And the things that I do will change by virtue of holding that aspiration. So merit is really the result of engaging in certain activities of body, speech, and mind. Just because we understand there's an interdependence between what we say and we think and we do and what we become. What we become. Now, in one way, there's nothing to become. As we already have said, the nature of mind itself, pure nature of mind, we are already all endowed with it. So there's nothing fundamentally to fix. So we might ask, then why are we here if it's not broken? Kind of cruel side of myself wants to just leave that. Just hold that question for a decade. We are not here to fix our minds. Our minds at the primordially pure level do not need to be fixed, cannot be fixed. They are pure as they are. But recognizing that purity is another matter. The problem here is that we don't recognize it. We don't see it. We see and believe in our ideas, our opinions, our rationalizations, whatever it is. So the accumulation of merit here references all the things that we would do that are part of the tradition that bring about insight and recognition of the nature of mind. As we engage in those things, we begin to have insights. As we engage in them mentally, our speech and our activities begin to reflect our intention to bring benefit to ourselves and to others. And as that happens, we call that, the effect of that, the accumulation of merit. So when it says at the bottom of the page, through the merit of generosity and other virtues. So as we are generous, as we are kind and helpful, we accumulate merit, which is to say that through all of our activities of body, speech, and mind, there is an interdependence that results in change. And that change is the manifestation of the accumulation of merit. So you can call it by any name you want. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, which references what we call the 6 perfections, but we're going to leave that for just now. Partly because we can talk about 6 virtues, but there's uncountable virtues. So it's okay, we'll just leave it for the moment. I say, through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. We might ask the question, what is Buddhahood? And one way to answer that, of the myriad ways that one could answer it, is the full recognition of the nature of mind itself. Full recognition of the nature of mind itself. So we could rewrite that line, which we're not going to do, but just for the sake of some diversity of clarity, we could say, through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I come to recognize the enlightened mind itself, the awakened mind itself, of which I am fully endowed already, as are all sentient beings. And when we say all sentient beings, there are no exceptions. So this is an important piece. We naturally want to help our friends. We naturally want to help. If the Dalai Lama comes and he needs something, we naturally want to give it. We want to help people who are already good. And so we tend to exclude those that we consider bad and figure like, let them work it out on their own. They deserve it anyway, so it's okay. But without those people who we consider unworthy, we would have no path. The path requires reaching out to those who appear impossible, unworthy, mean-spirited, all of the negative things. We have to have those. They are not something to put up with. They are actually the fundamental gift to the path. So, until enlightenment, let us recite this 3 times on page 11.
Until enlightenment,
I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. it's helpful from time to time to just take a little break in your meditation, which doesn't necessarily involve getting up and moving around and making a cup of tea and all of that, but just because while we're doing this, our body can get a little stiff and our mind can become distracted. So one of the ways an antidote to that is to move the body a little bit and stand up if you need to and stretch, and then sit back down again. And during that time of stretching a little bit, an important piece of it is to completely let go of the meditation. That is to say, not to reject it, not to intentionally turn it off, but put no effort into it whatsoever. Just let it go so that we can come back to it fresh. So take a moment, if you wish, to stretch a little bit.
Close that window for a little bit.
That's fine with me, is it okay?
Can we close it until the break?
Huh?
Can we close it until the break?
Would you like it closed?
Just until the break. Thanks.
On page 12, which is called Generating the Visualization, part of our practice, our meditation, all of which is intended to bring us to the place where we recognize that awakened nature of mind. We begin by, and continue, we begin by imagining that has already happened. We begin by imagining the potential. We begin by imagining the realization of that potential. And we do that over and over and over and over countless times. And so, keeping in mind that that's the intention, that we are actually intending to recognize our awakened mind directly and completely. Since we haven't been able to do that yet, we engage in it through the ritual of the Vajrayana of visualizing one statement I read was very nice, things that are unbelievably good. So if you look at the English again, you'll see something. On the crown of myself and sentient beings pervasive as space is a lotus and moon seat. So the visualization here, if you would please make an effort toward it, is first we imagine in front of us all sentient beings, which are uncountable, extending to the very limits of space itself. And right in front of us, again, are all of those beings with whom we have kind of conscious, known connection. Some of them pleasant, some of them unpleasant. But we nonetheless hold the equanimity as the key to this, that our intention is to benefit all sentient beings. So now, just thinking of ourselves and all sentient beings arrayed in front of us, we can add one more piece here which can be very helpful. We all understand the power of relationship. The power of relationship. When we know somebody and we treat them in a certain way, and they treat us in a certain way, we build what we call a relationship. And everybody understands that. We may not be skillful at developing those relationships, but we understand that we experience the result of having done it skillfully or unskillfully. So the idea here is that we are going to build a profoundly good relationship with all sentient beings. So we start with the liturgy that says, "On the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space." So here we're just acknowledging these uncountable sentient beings like an oceanic cloud in front of us, extending beyond any boundary that we might imagine. On the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space, is a lotus and moon seat. So we imagine here on the crown of our heads, on the crown of the heads of all sentient beings, a lotus and a moon seat. So the lotus is a white flower, and you can get into details about this, but for now I just want to make it like in broad brush kind of strokes. A lotus seat on the crown of your head, surmounted by a moon seat. Now the moon seat is a disc, which is kind of the color of a full moon at its zenith, its highest place in the sky, on a clear night. And that moon seat, which is a disc, not a sphere, rests on that moon seat. And on that moon seat appears what we call the letter Hri. Now the letter Hri is the nature of mind itself. If you know what the letter Hri looks like, that's great. If you don't know what it is, it's okay. You can just imagine for now a sphere of light about the size of a pea. That is to say, a little lentil. And it's just hovering above the moon seat. And it radiates light, that little sphere of light. That little sphere of light is, in essence, the nature of mind itself. From the light radiating from that Hri, we just imagine light radiating out in all directions. And that light is primarily white, and it travels, it fills all of space. And by virtue of that, those who have attained complete enlightenment, that is, the Buddhas of the past, present, and even the future, are pleased. By virtue of that, they radiate blessings back, which strike all beings, including ourselves. And that Hri is transformed instantly into Chenrezig. Now, before you know anything about Chenrezig, it would be nice if even when you know something about Chenrezig, you could abandon that knowing and start fresh each time. But before you know anything about Chenrezig, imagine that you are going to imagine some body, some being who is unimaginably pure and good, manifesting all of the elements of what we call the four immeasurables. That is to say, a wish for all sentient beings to be free of suffering and its causes. A wish for all sentient beings to have the causes and the experience of happiness. A wish for all sentient beings to experience the joy of virtuous acts and the consequences of committing virtuous acts. And a being who experiences this with complete, utter equanimity for all beings. So we call this, what did I miss here? Measurables. Yeah, okay, let's just leave it like that for now. So we think of this being on the crown of our head as Chenrezig. Chenrezig appears as a being who is white in color, from Chenrezig's body, 5 colored lights radiate, so we see that down on the last line on page 12. Smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes. The first pair of his 4 hands are joined together. He has 4 arms representing these immeasurables that we just mentioned. The next line says the lower 2 of his hands hold a crystal mala, which is like a rosary, and a white lotus. The white lotus indicating Chenrezig's ability to enter the world of confusion without being touched by it, in the same way that a lotus grows from a muddy pond but appears white and pure. Chenrezig is adorned with jewels and silk and wears a deerskin upper garment. On page 14, his head ornament is Amitabha. It's Amitabha Buddha, who is red in color. Amitabha Buddha we think of as actually the primary teacher or guru of Chenrezig. And Chenrezig is a emanation of Amitabha. Chenrezig's 2 legs sit in the Vajrasana, which is to say, crossed in what we normally think of as the lotus position. And a stainless moon supports his back, so there's a moon on edge, vertical, behind him like the back to a chair, as it were. And that moon symbolizes the complete compassion having permeated Chenrezig's being in all ways. So my intention here was not to create something that is complicated and difficult to imagine, but rather to think that we are witnessing a being who is utterly pure, the manifestation of the nature of mind itself, holding the wishes for all beings to be free of suffering, to experience only happiness and its causes, and so on, and that this being experiences also complete equanimity in relationship to all beings. So if we imagine this, and let us for a moment just imagine that we have engaged in this visualization so often and allowed it to be present in our minds that we actually come to have the experience when we recite the liturgy and imagine Chenrezig there, that we have the experience of Chenrezig being there. So what's important in that is that if you were to have that experience, it would be an inspiring experience. If that experience occurred, the inspiration of it would call forth some response from us. And that response is codified on page 15, where we recite an homage to Chenrezig, which in English is simple, but we'll also recite it in Tibetan a couple of times so that we can get the sense also of singing it. So the English says, "Noble one," referring to this Chenrezig, "untainted by the mire, your form is luminous white. A perfect awakened one adorns your head," that's Amitabha. "With the eyes of compassion, you gaze upon beings. To Chenrezig we bow." So normally when we get here, we we sing this short homage before moving on, and imagine that Chenrezig is present on the crown of our heads, and that we're acknowledging that through the recitation of the liturgy in the form of a song. So Pat will lead us in that now. Again, I think that if we have not fully practiced and studied the practice of Chenrezig, then it's helpful to remind ourselves that the intention here is to engage in speech and action and thought which is in accordance with our highest aspirations. And then we can see in the text that the text provides us with the means to engage in those practices and those aspirations, which will bear fruit like any of the other things that we might recite or do or say. So let's read the 7-branch prayer in English, and this time I will not give an explanation, but we can get that later if we wish.
With complete
faith I vow to the powerful Chenrezig, and to all the victors and their children who abide in the 10 directions and the 3 tones.
I offer flowers, incense,
Light, fragrance, food, music, and so on, both substantial and imaginary, and request the noble assembly to accept them. I confess the 10 non-virtuous acts, the 5 inexorable deeds, and all evil actions done, overpowered by the mental afflictions from beginningless time until now. I rejoice in the merit of whatever virtues Shravakas, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, ordinary people gather throughout the 3 tones. I pray for the wheel of the Dharma to be turned, the teachings of the Mahayana and Hinayana, in ways suitable for the different aptitudes and motivations present in sentient beings. Until samsara is completely empty, please do not pass into nirvana,
but look with compassion upon
sentient beings drowning in the ocean of suffering. May whatever merit I have gathered be the cause of enlightenment for all. Without delay, may I become a noble guide of beings. The prayer that we're about to begin has 2 kind of broad sections to it. The first section, beginning on page 23, includes another homage to Chenrezig and a request that Chenrezig hold us with compassion. So first we will read that, page 23 and 24, just reciting it in English.
I pray to you, Lama
Chenrezig, I pray to you, Yidam Chenrezig, I pray to you, perfect noble Chenrezig, I pray to you, refuge protector Chenrezig, I pray to you, Lord of love Chenrezig, victorious and compassionate one, hold us with your compassion, for beings experiencing unbearable suffering, wandering numberless in endless samsara. There is no refuge other than you, protector. Grant the blessing to attain all-knowing Buddhahood. Now at this point, one of the interesting things about most of the Vajrayana practices is that they contain a story, and the story here begins with our requesting various things from Chenrezig, which we just did. And in this particular case, then, and there is always this aspect in a Vajrayana practice, there's the place where the the actual being, or what we call a yidam, in this case, they have work to do. It's like we've made requests, and they are bound to fulfill those requests. And so we get to the place where the actual activity of Chenrezig becomes the meditation itself. So what we do here, the recitation, leads us through that. But before we begin that, we need to understand another little piece of what we might call the philosophical underpinnings of Tibetan Buddhism, which is, amongst other things, a piece of it is that the realms of experience for sentient beings, not just human beings, but any being with a mind, the realms of experience are divided into 6 broad categories. And each of those categories has some subcategories, but what's essential to understand is just that the categories, first, they're divided into 6, and we'll look at those for a moment. They're all realms that have some level of suffering. Some of the suffering is relatively small, and some of it is quite a lot. And in order to understand the activity of Chenrezig, we need to have some sense of what those 6 realms are. And we all have the experience of those 6 realms on a more or less daily basis. So it's not like they are just realms that are for others, but they're the place where sentient beings reside during the duration of confusion. So the first realm is we normally start with the worst realm. I always sense it would be nice to start with the best one, so you kind of remember that as you look at the other ones. It feels very dire. But anyway, the first one, in English, we've just borrowed the word hell from our Christian brothers and sisters, I think. So we have this realm, the hell realm, which is a realm of pretty much continuous suffering. But it's also good to make the distinction when we look at that word hell, that mostly it does not share the attributes that hell in a Christian context, for example, has. For example, hell is not forever. There's no forever hell. And so it all ends at some point. That is to say, no matter how much one did that brought about how much suffering for themselves and others, there is a natural end to that cycle. Meanwhile, the liturgy reads in the beginning on page 25 at the top, propelled by negative karma accumulated from beginningless time. So that's just to say, from the things that we thought and did and said, we have accumulated. On the one hand, we call it merit, and on the other hand, we call it the causes of rebirth in hell. So it's an issue of recognizing interdependence. What you think and do and say bears fruit. Propelled by negative karma from beginningless time, sentient beings are born in hell by the force of anger. So anger is there because anger is generally considered the most poisonous of the emotional states. Therefore, someone who lives a life that is driven primarily by anger is likely to suffer the worst consequences at some point. So, first of all, the first part of it is we recognize, propelled by negative karma accumulated from beginningless time, sentient beings are born in hell by the force of anger. the next line says, and experience the suffering of heat and cold. Now, the reason they put heat and cold there is because those are considered the most serious forms of suffering. Too hot, too cold. Freezing cold, really bad suffering. Flames, really bad suffering. So heat and cold are often listed as the suffering of the hell realms, but it includes a wide array of characteristics of suffering, not just heat and cold. So we recite this down to there, which basically reminds us of what the hell realm is meant to be. And then we have the liturgy continues, may they be born in your presence, supreme deity. So now we're talking about may they be, those individuals when they are born again, are born in the presence of Chenrezig. In other words, born in the presence of complete compassion, kindness, and caring. We recite Chenrezig's mantra, O Mani Padme Hum, and at that time we imagine that from the Chenrezig on the crown of our head, light radiates in all directions, and in particular that light strikes the beings in the hell realms, and those beings are relieved of, purified of their negative karma, and the suffering in the hell realms. So we're going to go through all 6 realms here, and one by one imagine that the light from Chenrezig's body radiates and strikes the beings in each of those realms. Now, one of the things that we often forget is that when we come to the human realm, we often forget to imagine that the light radiating from Chenrezig's body purifies our karma and relieves us of the suffering of the various realms. When the light strikes the body of sentient beings and they are relieved of their suffering, they appear as Chenrezig instead of as an ordinary sentient being. So when we come to the human realm, we have to think of ourselves as appearing as Chenrezig when the light from Chenrezig's body strikes beings in the human realm. We imagine that we appear also as Chenrezig at that point. So we're going to go through these 6 realms up through page 30. We'll recite them in English, and then we'll come back and recite once more after a short break. We'll come back and recite it in Tibetan, so we get the feeling of it. So for now, from the first line,
Propelled by negative
karma accumulated from beginningless time, sentient beings are born in hell by the force of anger and experience the suffering of heat and cold. May they be born in your presence, supreme deity. O Mani Padme Hum. Propelled by negative karma accumulated from beginningless time, sentient beings are born in the Yidok realm by the force of greed
and experience the suffering of hunger and thirst. May they be born in the perfect realm of Otala.
O Mani Padme Hum. Propelled by negative karma accumulated from beginningless time, sentient beings are born as animals by the force of bewilderment and experience the suffering of stupidity. May they be born in your presence, protector, O Mani Padme Hum. Propelled by negative karma accumulated from beginningless time, sentient beings are born in the human realm by the force of desire and attachment, and experience the suffering of excess activity and frustration. May they be born in the perfect realm of Dewa Chen, O Mani Padme Hum. propelled by negative karma accumulated from beginningless time, sentient beings are born in the demigod realm by the force of jealousy, and experience the suffering of fighting and quarreling. May they be born in the realm of the Potala, O Mani Padme Hum. Propelled by negative karma accumulated from beginningless time, sentient beings are born in the God realms by the force of pride, and experience the suffering of change and falling. May they be born in the realm of the Potala, O Mani Padme Hum. Life after life, with actions equaling Chenrezig's, may I liberate all beings from impure realms and spread the perfect sound of the 6 syllables in the 10 directions. By the power of praying to you, perfect noble one, may the beings to be treated by me take heed of action and result, and strive for virtuous activity.
May they possess the Dharma for the benefit of beings.
We're going to take another break now, so I just want to remind you of the essential point here, or one of the essential points, is that all of the pieces of the liturgy are about engaging in speech and thoughts and activities which are meant to and are actually effective over time in calling forth a transformation such that our speech, our thoughts, our mind, and our activities take on a new appearance and are able to bring benefit to all sentient beings. So we'll now take another 10-minute break or so. We'll ring the bell to come back.